Welcome to the Mind Body Weight Loss Summit. I'm John Gabriel, author and creator of the Gabriel Method, a diet-free approach to sustained weight loss. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by Jessica Ortner, who will be speaking to us about her knowledge of tapping for weight loss and body confidence. Jessica Ortner is one of the producers of The Tapping Solution, a breakthrough documentary film on EFT or meridian tapping. She's the author of The Tapping Solution for Weight Loss and Body Confidence, a book based on her revolutionary online program which has helped more than 3,000 women tackle the stress that leads to weight gain. She's also the host of the Tapping World Summit, an annual online event that's attracted more than 500,000 attendees from around the world. She's been interviewing experts in the field of personal development since 2007 and has conducted more than 200 broadcast interviews to date. As you're listening today, you can learn more about Jessica Ortner and the work she does by visiting her website at jessica-ortner.com or thetappingsolution.com. So Jessica, thanks so much for joining us today. I wonder if you can give us a brief overview of tapping and how it's used for stress relief in general.
Sure. So tapping is, like you said, it's a stress relief technique where you literally tap on acupressure points. Now, the key with tapping is to get very clear on the thought that's creating the physical anxiety. So, as you know, John, sometimes we are worried about something, we get stressed out, and we're logically telling ourselves to calm down or to think differently, but we're really struggling because we might have a pressure in our chest or we feel it in our stomach. You know, when we feel emotions, we feel them with our whole body. This is a technique that uses the whole body to help relieve that anxiety. So you get very clear on the thought that's creating the physical response, and you begin to tap on these acupressure points. And you get to the point where you can have the same thought, but without the physical anxiety anymore. And that's when you have the power to be more resourceful, to think differently, to be creative.
Yeah. So I understand you struggled also with cycles of dieting and binge eating, and you didn't originally use tapping for that. You discovered it eventually. I'm wondering, what made you think of tapping and how did it end up working for you?
So tapping was my life. I had made a documentary film about tapping. I was doing online events about tapping, but I wasn't using it on the one area of my life that I had the most pain, which was my weight and my body confidence. Yeah. And I think the reason it took me so long is because I was raised in the same culture everybody else has been raised in, where it's all about calories in, calories out. Right. It's all about discipline and being hard on yourself and willpower. And I just felt very unlucky, like I had entered this world with a lack of willpower that everybody else has. Right. And I feel sometimes life gets your attention, through either getting sick or someone saying something. Your world sometimes is shaken up for a greater purpose. And what happened to me was I had all these experiences of people commenting on my weight. I had a mentor tell me I was fat and nobody was gonna listen to what I had to say until I lost weight. So it wasn't just, for me, a lot of my self-value was tied around my weight loss. Yeah. And a lot of tricky emotions, like the belief of, well, if I lose weight and then I get more attention and people listen to me, are they listening to me because I have value or because of the way that I look? Yeah. And that kind of emotional struggle. And it wasn't until one day I was recognized, one of the first times I was recognized, this woman goes, "Oh, I love your interviews. I'm such a big fan of the work you do at the Tapping Solution." And she looked me up and down and she said, "Oh, you're a lot bigger than I thought." And there was something though divine about her mentioning my work, mentioning my biggest wound. Yeah. That made me just wake up and go, how is it that I'm teaching this? I'm passionate about it, but I'm not using it on this. And that's when I started my own journey, never thinking I'd share it with anyone else, never thinking I'd ever be seen as any kind of weight loss expert, but really just because I had so much pain and I was looking for relief and looking for results.
So you mentioned on an interview recently that you had this light bulb moment where you realized that you can't hate yourself thin and you can't stress yourself thin. And I think really what you're saying is you can't do the typical paradigm of just forcing yourself through restriction and willpower and discipline and just really beating yourself up. And I'm wondering if you can tell us what happened when you had that light bulb moment.
I had to realize that we can't compartmentalize our lives. A lot of times the weight is happening because there's something else going on in our lives. And what I like about your approach is that you look at a person as a whole.
Yeah.
You're looking at the emotions as well as the nutrition. And yeah, I thought that I could just hate myself skinny, and I prided myself on how hard I was on myself. I thought it made me realistic. It made me mean that I strive for more. And I was scared that, well, if I love and accept myself, doesn't that mean that I'll never get off the couch? Doesn't that mean I'll, never make anything of myself? And that's the belief that's the life I lived. And it's very hard to strive and take steps forward when you have a really mean girl in your head or mean man in your head telling you that whatever you do isn't enough. And I had to realize that that very voice that I thought was benefiting me was the very thing that was holding myself back. And one of the other things I say is, if it's not pleasurable, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
One of the reasons, go ahead.
I just got to say, it's just so ironic, isn't it, that, we're taught that you have to push yourself and really, almost hate yourself in a sense, that you got to really keep banging away and banging away. And what we've learned now is that all of those negative feelings are causing hormonal imbalances in our body that are causing us to gain weight. And it's the very negative feelings that that we think are our best friends. In a sense, it's like this voice knows better. We got this voice in our head that says, "I know better, and you listen to me." And we're just led to believe that that's the right approach. When in reality, that very voice is for a lot of us the very problem.
Yeah. And so let's talk about fear. The fear is, if I love and accept myself, I'll never change. I'll sit on the couch and be useless.
Yeah.
One of the things I say is, if a lot of people who are listening have children. If your child is sitting on the couch all day, every day, watching TV, doesn't want to get up, doesn't want to do anything, do you just say, okay, I love and accept you, you don't need to do anything? No, you go, I love you so much and I see your potential, so let's work on this. Let's get out there. Let's do something. Yeah. And that's the relationship we have to have with ourselves. I love you so much. I value you so much. I'm going to take time for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times the only time we have for ourselves is when we're eating junk food. Then we get on a diet and we don't have that anymore and we're miserable. And so loving and taking time for ourselves is an essential part to living in a body where we feel like we're thriving physically and emotionally.
Well, you bring up this analogy of working with kids, and I really think that the relationship that you have with your body is similar to a relationship that you have with your kids. Because if you're denying your kids all the time and just always criticizing your kids all the time, they're going to do two things. Number one, they're going to underperform, and they're going to be rebellious.
Yes.
And especially with food, if you're denying your kids all the time, then they're going to find a way. And I did this. I grew up, in a culture that was like this. And you always find ways. You always find ways to get junk food and to be rebellious. And our bodies are the same. I think our bodies will be rebellious and they will underperform if we're critical and we deny them all the time. But if you treat your body like a child that you really love and you start to develop that type of relationship, it'll start overperforming. It'll start trying to please you the same way a kid will start trying to please you. And that's where the energy comes from. Then the energy comes from passion. It doesn't come from being whipped.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And there are a lot of people having this conversation now. I feel like there is a movement. Yeah. The other thing I'm passionate about is body confidence. I don't think that confidence comes from weight loss. I think weight loss comes from confidence. We're living it backwards.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think weight loss to me is always a reflection of what's going on in your body. Like your life, sometimes your life has to change, your thinking has to change, your feeling has to change. And the weight is oftentimes the last thing to manifest. It's the physical manifestation of all the things that are going on in your mental state.
But this is what we have to be careful with as well, is I have women who look at pictures of themselves in the past and they say to me, I look back on that picture and I remember that day in the bathing suit and how uncomfortable I felt. Yeah. And now I look back and think, what were you thinking? You were gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's also the way that we let the panic rob us of the present moment. Yeah. And, a lot of us are living in this jail feeling like I will live once I lose the weight. Yeah. Once you start living, that's when it becomes easier to lose that weight.
I'll take it a step further, Jessica. When you have this feeling like I'll start living once I lose the weight, for example, I'll start dating once I lose the weight. I'll get a job once I lose the weight. I'll start that business once I lose the weight. Oftentimes, you're using the weight as an excuse and you're never going to lose the weight because there's fears around dating. You could be rejected, you could be hurt, all these things. about working. Maybe you don't want to work, or maybe you might get fired, you might not get hired. So all these fears about success and failure that are built into the other things, and we're using the weight as an excuse, and it's like we're gonna push away the weight because that means we're gonna have to face those other issues. So if you face the other issues first, then there's nothing stopping you from losing the weight. So it's exactly what you say, that the confidence, the body confidence has to come first, and the weight manifests.
And this is where the tapping comes in.
Right.
Because we can logically have this conversation and go, we need to
Right.
feel confident. And then it's time to put on that, bathing suit, and we're just the confidence. Where is the confidence?
Yeah.
How do I buy it? And that's where we gotta.
So how did you use tapping then for weight loss and body confidence?
Well, the place that I started was I realized I had to stop the pattern of panic.
Yeah.
The pattern of panic it's a pattern we're all familiar with. You stand in front of the mirror, you freak out, you panic because you have to do something, you feel like you're about to be seen, you don't feel good enough. That panic leads to a diet. You do that for a very short time, depriving yourself until something else grabs your attention or you're just exhausted of it. And then you go back to old eating, and then it again revolves again. You find yourself in front of the mirror and you panic. So the first kind of thing we have to target is the panic we feel in the moment. So this idea, I'm not allowed to relax until I lose weight.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to feel good about myself until I lose weight. And so just by getting very clear about what is that initial panic, where that's coming from, you can tap in the moment to feel confident and great. And this is really important. A lot of times people go to parties, and so there's maybe like a holiday party or just any type of party, and they're nervous and they find themselves eating everything. Because when we're nervous or when we're panicked, we're not in control anymore.
Yeah.
And so my very first step was to start using it on a daily basis anytime I felt that kind of panic.
So you used it on moment by moment to end this, what you call this pattern of panic.
That's how I started. And then I definitely had to do, I wrote a big book about this topic, and people often wonder how I could write such a big book about tapping for weight loss. And the reason is, like you mentioned before, we have these different emotional challenges, like the idea, if I lose weight, then I might have to date, then I might have to step up in my career. The way that we often use weight as a protection. So we need to find what we're protecting ourselves from. And a lot of times we're protecting ourselves from pain that already happened that we're still living with. And so with the tapping, we can begin to ask ourselves questions to get clear on what that is. So, for example, a question I love is, what's the downside to losing weight? When I sat with myself, my first reaction was nothing. This is all I want. It's all I think about. I obsess about it. But when I really had a moment where I just let myself be quiet, I realized, okay, well, if I lose weight, then what if I blamed everything on my body. I blamed everything because of my weight. If I don't have the weight, I have nothing to blame any failure on. What if I lose the weight and I'm still not successful? Then what happens? Then I realize I'm not good enough. Yeah. Or if I lose the weight, then I am telling these past people that hurt me in the past that what they did was okay. And by me holding on to the pain and to the weight, it's saying to those that I felt had hurt me in the past, that look what you did to me. And I realized I had to bring in forgiveness towards the situations that happened in the past. And it can be very difficult if you don't have a tool like tapping that helps you deal with the physical sensations. Because a lot of times we logically know, yes, we should forgive. We hear it all the time. But feeling it is something different. Yeah. So I love the fact that we can get into the body with this technique.
That's what I find, is that pain and trauma is often held in the body, and we can talk about it forever, but if you've been abused as a kid, or you've developed some dysfunctional thinking, you have to work on some sort of energetic or cellular way to release it, and tapping is really effective for that. And one of the most common things that I find in working with women is that they get to a certain point where they lose some weight and they start becoming attractive to men, and that scares them. And there's lots of reasons why that could scare them. Maybe there was some abuse in the past, or maybe just the thought of the thrill of being physical again with someone. There's a whole range of reasons, but it comes up very, very frequently. Do you use tapping to help work through this type of emotional issue?
Absolutely. It was one of the things that made a biggest difference for me. Right now you see on the internet, there's a lot of buzz about trying to end catcalling. on the streets. And I think catcalling is incredibly inappropriate. But this is the thing. I live in New York City. It's a part of my reality.
Yeah.
And do I wish that it would change? Absolutely. But I need to be so much in my power that it's not impacting me. So this is what happened to me in the past. I had this open wound. So here I am with this open wound. Someone makes a little comment about my body, my weight. Even when someone would say, you look like you lost weight, my first reaction was, think I was fat before, or stop looking at my body. You know, just this idea of I just don't want to be seen. And so here I am with this open wound, and anyone comes with a little bit of a feather or brushes against it, and I just panic because it's such a painful experience. I had to realize I can't control other people's reactions to me, but I can heal that wound. Exactly. And by healing that wound, I had to go back to those past experiences. And a big part of it was I learned how to create boundaries. So when I can be so in my body that if I get a catcall or an attention, I can trust my gut. I know how to react. When before, any comment would just throw me off balance.
So Jessica, do you mind me asking, because I find that boundaries are the most important issue in weight, and I have boundary issues myself, and people that have been abused in their past often have boundaries because abuse is a boundary violation. And abuse can be very subtle. It can be a mental thing, you know, it can be your father saying, oh, you're no good, or it can be a teacher saying, making a comment, or it can be a bully on the street, or it can be sexual abuse. You know, there's so many layers to it, but there is a violation of your boundaries, and I often find that people use weight to protect them when they don't have strong boundaries. If you can't say no, if you can't walk away, if you're feeling threatened, these are all areas where there's boundaries. And we're always looking for techniques to help strengthen people's boundaries. And I'm wondering if you can just tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit about how you personally use tapping with your clients and with yourself to get that feeling of boundaries, to strengthen your boundaries.
Right. Well, one of the things that I had to do was actually look at my past, at those experiences when I didn't feel like I had boundaries. And for me, I had actually a learning disability. I struggled with school, and so I stayed back a year at a young age. So by the time it was, puberty time, I hit puberty before everyone else. And in one summer, I just got really big breasts. And I just remember walking in and everything changed. I mean, I grew up with older brothers. All of my friends tended to be guys, and all of them changed. So suddenly I wasn't part of the gang anymore. I was just kind of being seen. And all of those emotions of going through puberty and feeling like I just remember thinking, my body's ruining everything. I was having so much fun and feeling like a little girl, and not understanding why now I had to deal with all of this masculine attention that I didn't know what to do with. Tina Fey jokes in her book and says it's very sad that when people, one of the common responses when a woman is asked, when did you know you were a woman, is when somebody said something, when there was a cat call, and suddenly they become aware of their body. And so I had to go back to those experiences, which at the time still triggered me. Now, this is the thing about the past. Before I told you that I had a mentor that told me, you're fat and no one's going to listen to what you have to say until you lose weight. John, I could not utter those words. I couldn't tell anyone about that experience because it was so painful to me. Now I can talk about it. I don't believe it's true. It's a story I tell. But before, if I had to say those words, no one's going to listen to you until you lose weight, I would just start crying. And that is the moment when you're in that hurt that, I would just begin to stimulate these acupressure points, allowing myself the freedom to feel what I was feeling and begin to let it go. And so for me, it was going back to those little events in puberty when I felt like I didn't feel safe in my body. It wasn't fair. My body was to blame. And I gained all the weight in high school, and then I noticed I didn't get the attention anymore. And I loved that, and I hated it. That.
I understand. This is so common, and to me, these are the real issues. Because what happens is people lose maybe let's say they've got 50 pounds to lose, and they lose 10 pounds through just sheer brute force, willpower, and dieting. And then something happens, someone says, oh, you look great, or they notice something, and then all of a sudden they freak out. And I've had this so many times. I don't know what happened. I sabotaged myself. And I said, this is not sabotage. This is preservation. There's a difference. Your body has created this mistaken association that somehow having the extra weight is protecting you, and maybe it's not mistaken. Maybe it really is protecting you from an emotional wound, but it's not sabotage, it's preservation. And
I love that, because you know why, Don? Then we can be more compassionate towards ourselves.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I'm broken.
Yeah,
I'm
there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body is, and there's nothing wrong with your body. That's the most important thing. Our bodies are brilliant and they're trying to protect us. And when you realize that, then you start looking for solutions, and you've got a very powerful solution. And so, is it correct for me to say that once you started tapping on those wounds from puberty, from high school, et cetera, then you felt, because the wounds went away, you were able to develop stronger boundaries? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I also had to be okay with disappointing others. When you want to make everybody happy and you're a very energetically sensitive person, you don't want to create a boundary because you don't want to upset someone, even though they might be hurting you. I mean, John, I used to be the girl where if someone punched me in the face, I would be like, I'm so sorry, my face got in the way of your fist. Is your hand okay? You know, and I had to realize that, like, in order for me to create boundaries, I had to be okay with disappointing others. And it is practice. First, you can look at your past and do the tapping, and then it's a skill that you practice. And when I first practiced saying no, I would talk too much, I would over-explain, I wasn't elegant with it. And Cheryl Richardson actually talks a lot about this, and I, through practice, got better at saying no. But what I would do is, before I had to say no, I would begin to tap so that I could kind of feel centered in my body and feel like I could speak my truth. And saying no to helping someone move, yes, it impacts your weight. We think it doesn't. We think that these are all separate occasions, but when you're over-giving to other people, it's going to impact your weight and your ability to create boundaries.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of times we're over-giving to people because we're not giving to ourselves, and so we need it from other people. So, but what it sounds to me like is you created a more loving relationship with yourself and your body. You healed the wounds, and so you're giving to yourself. And when you're giving to yourself, you're not as dependent on everybody else's approval. And especially because when you're less judgmental of yourself and more loving of yourself, if somebody else has a negative thought or judgment about you, it's not going to hurt you, because it's not going to resonate inside you as if like, oh, they're right, I'm not enough, or I'm not good enough. So you become less dependent on that, and then it's easier to say no, and in a sense, draw a stronger boundary.
Yeah. And if I could almost back up a little bit, going back to puberty, because we're talking about safety and sexuality, but another thing that we need to take a close look at when it comes to puberty is when we started middle school, that's when we started to create associations with movement and exercise. If you see a child, they are just playful, it's not working out, it's called being a kid. Then you get into gym class and you're either good or bad at it. You're either first place or last place. And so when it comes to, I love that you talk about self-preservation, because if you had an experience through puberty where you felt ashamed, you couldn't run fast enough, you were ashamed, you look at physical activities as this really painful experience. And a lot of people, in order to protect themselves from the pain, they go, well, I'm not one of those girls or one of those guys. I'm a reader, I'm a bookworm, or I'm not that. And so the idea of physical activity seems so outside of our identity. We have to go back. I know it sounds silly, but you have to go back to that time when you were 11 years old and you came in last place and you were embarrassed. Because that is the person you become when you try to exercise now as an adult.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point. For me, I'm looking at you systematically healing all your wounds. And that's one I never really looked at too closely, but it's true. You go back to that time when you were picked last, when you were didn't do well, when you're embarrassed in some way, and then you're shut off from it. So by going back to those experiences, you're able to go past them and then maybe go a little bit further to when exercise was just fun for the sake of fun, and you're able to reconnect with that. Is that your experience? Is that what?
Exactly, because the thing about moving your body is I don't have to be good. I love yoga. I'm not like good at it. I can't do a handstand, but I love it. And the thing is, I wouldn't have been able to love it if I didn't deal with the critical voice that said to me all the time, if you're not the best, you're not enough.
So you talk about something else that I want to just touch on real quick, which I'm just learning more and more about, and how useful it is. And that is, once you get past all the wounds and all the pain, so you've worked through all the abuse issues and all the reasons why you needed the weight to protect you, and you feel safe, then there's another step, and that is there's this desire that we all have inside us to have pleasure, you know, which we have cut off because we're in survival, we're in defense mode. You know, if like if you were running away from a tiger, you wouldn't have time to think about pleasure. You know what I mean? Or if you were starving to death, you wouldn't have time to think about pleasure. But if all your needs are taken care of, it's like, you know, when you look at the hierarchy of needs, all your needs are taken care of. So you're not in a fearful state anymore, and you feel safe, and you're more successful. The weight's coming off, and then you start to look at this other issue that you haven't even looked at, but what we all need is pleasure. And I know you talk about how important pleasure is and bringing pleasure back into your life in terms of weight loss. And I'm wondering if you can give us your take on that.
Like you mentioned, when we're in that panic state, we have no room for pleasure.
Yeah.
But I think the pleasure needs to be introduced really early on, because when we're doing the work on ourselves, it's not like we're only thinking about those past events and can't have any pleasure until we heal all the wounds.
Yeah.
What we actually need to do is we need to look at our life and look at how we're allowing ourselves to relax and feel good, because for many of us, the only time we give ourselves a break is through food. Suddenly you're on a diet and you don't have that ability to relax. Your body needs to relax. It's craving it. So your cravings go up.
Yeah.
You know, your desire to overeat goes up. And so you have to look at how in your life, are you having fun? Are you excited? Are you feeling pleasure that doesn't involve food? Because so many of us have built a life where all of the magic moments happen around food.
It's really interesting, yeah.
And so it's you know, and a lot of times we're like, well, I don't even know how to feel good.
Yeah.
What about going for a walk? What about not doing anything?
Yeah.
You know, even people say like, okay, you can take a bath, but even not taking a bath, even just sitting on your couch for 10 minutes and just letting yourself relax is just so vital, instead of feeling like you have to be standing over the kitchen counter eating those pretzels in order for you to give yourself a second to breathe.
Yeah, and all of those different moments that we can give ourselves of fun, pleasure, relaxation are changing our body's chemistry, basically, and making it infinitely easier for us to lose weight. You know, Jessica, I love how approachable you are. You know, you're a very real person, and you share your stories, and I can just hear people just connecting with you as you're talking, and I just think that that's so valuable, and you're offering an incredibly valuable tool also. And I'm just wondering, you know, what's the best way for us to connect with you so we can learn more about how we can use tapping and some of the techniques that you have, and any new things that you have coming up?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. The tappingsolution.com is the best place to go. And also I have a great Facebook community, facebook.com/following Jessica Ortner. But we have a lot of great resources over at the Tapping Solution. And you can pick up my book at any major bookstore, at least in the US. It's The Tapping Solution for Weight Loss and Body Confidence.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Jessica, I love the work that you're doing. I love the way you're sharing it with the world. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
Take care. Okay, thanks everyone for watching. So I love Jessica's work because she's so approachable and her tools are so useful. So definitely get onto the Tapping Solution and follow her and learn more about how to use tapping for weight loss and body confidence. And I'll speak to you soon. Take care.